Hello everyone, Professor Ashlyn here, coming at you with another Fi related video. And today I have a very fun video that I've been wanting to do for a while, which is Fi 101 or Fi Fundies. Basically, making a video just talking about the fundamentals of Fi, answering a bunch of burning questions that newer Fi players really run into, and hopefully this helps you out in learning Fi. Even if you're an experienced player, hopefully you find something cool here. And I want to get straight into it. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit of a dummy, and I once again forgot to structure my slides so I can fit a camera. So I gotta go and hide my camera real quick, and then we can finally start getting into the video. Also, shout out to Zach Benton for giving me this idea. I will put the YouTube comment up on screen right now. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Just an intro about me and kind of what this video is going to be about. I've been playing Fab for about a year and a half now. I started playing like later during the heavy season. I got into the game playing the Fi Blitz deck, and then I played Fi for a bit, then tried some different heroes before eventually coming back to Fi and Rosetta. And since Rosetta, I've like pure mained him. He's the most played hero. He's the hero I take to every single competitive event I go to. I haven't really swapped up too much since then. And in terms of success, I'm not a professional player who like top 8s a bunch of pro tours. But at my local scene, I did top 8 4 out of the 5 PQs and RTNs I attended, and my highest placing ended up being second. As you can see in the photo in the top right, that's my money spread that I got after getting second. And just to further, kind of emphasize that I kind of know what I'm talking about, is that like a lot of other people tried my list and have found great success with it, as you can see by some of the comments made in the bottom right. Shouts to the purple Discord with the Fi section. Some lovely people there. All right, so the point of this video, fundamentally, is to just get a new Fi player up to speed on the core fundies. We're going to focus primarily on burning questions, matchup stuff, equipment, sequencing, basically everything you need to know to like grab the deck and then play games and have a good time, and then be able to build off those fundamentals yourself with the knowledge you learn through playing through the games. This video will be focused on evergreen general strategy. I'm not going to be talking about very specific like opponent related interactions or stuff like that. I'm mainly going to be discussing evergreen subject matter and topics, but I may use outdated examples that might not be too accurate. I will do my best to update this as best as possible, but my hope is that I don't have to do that too much. And importantly, we will not be covering highly nuanced and theoretical topics. I played Fi a lot, and there is a lot more to the hero than people say sometimes, and a lot of general Fab skills that really can up your Fi game. But I didn't really want to make this video that, because I have plans to make a video like that, whether it's a live stream or an article or another video like this, where we go in depth with those things. So if you want to see that, please let me know in the comments, and I will make a Fi 102 course or whatever. So how does Fi generally play? I came up with this fun little acronym where he is flexible, aggressive, consistent, easy to learn, underutilized, and he has playable matchups. And then also he's face up, which is like the last thing on that list, but I found a funny way to incorporate it all. So he is flexible because, he didn't used to be in terms of the way he operated. He was more of a, I'm going to play Art of War, and I'm just going to hope to God you don't disrupt me on my big Art of War turn. Nowadays, he has a lot of 3 blocks on the deck. He can play mid-rangey in certain matchups. He can play a more non-draconic playstyle. He can play a more fealty generation kind of playstyle. He's a very flexible hero, and he can play a lot differently depending on the matchup and kind of adapt around your opponent sometimes, which is not usually what you see from an aggressive deck. He is aggressive. This is a aggro hero. He is, I will dump my hand on the board and I will try to kill you as fast as possible. That's just the way he plays. And if you don't like aggressive decks, you probably won't like him. But if you do, he is an amazing aggressive deck. He is really fun to play. He is also very consistent, depending on the way you build him. But generally, the most common sort of Fi builds kind of rely on the fact that a lot of your cards do very similar things. So you're often able to just output damage turn over turn. So he doesn't have he has a decent ceiling, but on average, he usually does a little less damage than your traditional aggro deck. But he makes up for it in the fact that he doesn't run into situations like Azalea or like Rip Aurora, where you can just draw really bad hands and then not be able to function as a hero. He's also easy to learn. I started the game learning Fi. I don't think he's too difficult at like a base level, just because all your cards do very similar things. Sequencing is a fun skill to do, but like very basic Fi sequencing is not too incredibly difficult. He is underutilized. Compared to Syndra, who came out very recently in the Hunted, Syndra is a way more popular deck than Fi currently, because not a lot of people were playing Fi pre-Hunted, and when the Hunted came out, people were like, oh, if I want to play Fi, I'd rather just play Syndra. They are different for a lot of reasons, which I can go to at some other point, but essentially, he is the less utilized of the two Draconic Ninja heroes, so you can kind of gain advantages from people not playing against the newer version of Fi as much, and it feels cool to play a hero that not a lot of other people playing. It also means he might take a little bit to LL. And then the playable matchups is sort of the last thing. I find that when I play Fi, because he is a little bit, he's pretty flexible, and a lot of his cards block for 3 nowadays, he's actually he's like the classic archetype of hero, where he doesn't really have any truly terrible matchups. He usually has, most of his matchups lie within the 40 to 60 range, where if you have the knowledge, you are able to eke out good advantages and beat decks that you might be slightly unfavorable against. But there is no matchup except for maybe Victor that I'm like, this is really bad for us. And then we also have a lot of matchups that I think are really good for our hero, at least currently. This might change depending on a bunch of different things. But for now, the way I see it, I think there's a lot of appeal to playing a hero that when you sit down and play against someone, you always have a chance and you're not really running into too many polarizing matchups. Now, we're going to go into the equipment, which you start the game with. It's quite important. I'm going to be talking about some decisions with what equipment to pick and also what you want to do with said equipment. So first off, we got the great debate. Emberblade versus Kodachi. Previously, in past metas, Fi used to run a Switchblade list where it'd run Kodachi into certain matchups and Emberblade into others. Sometimes there was pure Kodachi builds, pure Emberblade builds. But nowadays, to put it simply, Searing Emberblade does 3 damage, Kodachi does 2 damage. Usually speaking, that just makes it better in most scenarios. Kodachi is good for leaking damage against defensive decks, but it also can cause some brick scenarios where they're not draconic inherently, so you can't really help with the chain. You kind of need Brand with Cinderclaw, and you can't use Fealty on them to make them draconic, which I think they would be considered an option if you could use Fealty. And so Fi right now, in his current state, which might change in the future, but I think it's going to stay very similar because I don't see much of a chance for new cards to be out of the pool anytime soon, is that we just want to maximize our numbers right now, deal as much damage as possible, and Emberblade is the best card to allow us to do that. If you want to play a dagger-based Draconic Ninja style, I would suggest playing Syndra. I've been playing her a little bit recently. She is quite fun. She's way more inconsistent than Fi, from my experience. Sometimes you can just draw really bad hands, but she does play the dagger playstyle quite well, if that's kind of your jam. Headpiece when it pop links. This is probably the most asked question ever that I ever get from people learning Fi, from people talking in the Discord. And there's a very simple answer to this, which is if you can get 7 value from links, you pop it. Most of the time, getting that 7 value is usually enough to win you the game in a lot of your matchups. Some matchups, you might need to eke out a little more value out of it to make it more playable. But most of the time, if you like get a Spreading Flames down or a Rake down, and you see, oh, if I pop links, it'll get buffed by that and buffed by Shuko, so it comes in for 7. That's usually enough to warrant you just saying, okay, I'm just going to pop this thing. Your common targets for this are Lava Burst, Salt the Wound, Tenacity, and sometimes Ignite, depending on the situation. Ignite's unique advantage is that it can reduce a 1 cost. So if you need to play a 1 cost and you want to keep tempo, you will want to play tutor the Ignite and then play the 1 cost. And it providing 2 chain links means stuff like Spreading Flames or Rake applies to both. So you get double buff from that. However, I see commonly some people will be like, oh, I tutor for a brand with Cinderclaw sometimes. I find that tutoring for brand is only in very, very specific situations, and I rarely end up tutoring it. So I would advise against it unless you have a really, really, really good reason to, like you have an Art of the Dragon Fire, which I don't personally run. But if you have more like I need to make things Draconic build, then you can always tutor that up. Now, one thing I will say before, without going into like advanced Mask of the Pouncing Lynx theory, is that you kind of want to map out your Lynx flowchart before you start swinging. So there's a common trip up that people have where they will swing with a card and then not know whether their opponent's going to hit or block. And then if the opponent lets it hit, they start debating, oh, do I pop Lynx now? Do I pop Lynx later? And when you let your opponent know that you're making a decision, they can kind of play around the fact that you want Lynx and sometimes negate it or be able to cover it up if they have a lot of efficient armor or they're really okay with blocking. So just make sure you know, okay, my opponent blocked here. That's fine. I want to hit it here. Or, oh, my opponent hit here. This is where I pop the Lynx. Try to have a general idea of what you're trying to do with the card on your turn when to pop it, because there is certain times where you want to wait a couple chain links to confirm that Salt the Wound would be more valuable, because if you pop Salt the Wound early, they just block out. If you pop Tenacity early, they just block out. I can go in this card for days, and hopefully I'll be able to talk about it in a future video. But for now, the rule of thumb is if you get 7 value, you should pop this thing. 95% of the time, that's good enough to get what you want out of it. Now, why not Mask of Momentum? And this card is very powerful. The draw is great. Syndra has great success using it. However, the current file lists that are running right now don't really have frequent breakpoints. And that's kind of where you extract the value out of Mask of Momentum, where if you come with a 4 card on the chain link, they have to commit a card for man and an armor or 2 pieces of armor. But oftentimes, what I've noticed is that every class across the board has had a power creep in armor, where almost every deck has some way to block you, except for like Wizards and Syndra. So oftentimes, the matchups where you would want to run Mask of Momentum, they usually can just commit like a card and then an equipment piece and then negate it for the entire turn, unless you have like a really wide turn that you want to maximize. And the kind of idea of this card is you want to play it in decks that don't want to block, so you can get the draw effect. But those decks make the game go faster because they push the pace. If they're not blocking, that means they're swinging at you, which means you're probably not blocking, which means the game goes so fast that you only can get like 1 to 2 triggers by the time the game gets into the end game. And then at that point, you might as well just take in links to force them into a worse spot. And also sometimes you draw blues off of it. I think this has niche use into heroes that have many allies. It's a great board clearer option because you can just guarantee get the hits by attacking the allies. It might be good into Gravy Bones, usually not in the Prism. But if Gravy Bones ends up being a problem, I could see running it in the sideboard. But for now, I don't think it's worth it to base your deck off of it. This may change in the future if like a lot more decks don't present a lot of really good armor. Now, for your arm piece, I don't see a world where you're not running anything but Shuko. This card is what the deck is partly built around, because you get that Phoenix Flame almost every turn. If you get even 1 more 2 or less, you extract +1 value from this. So this is great with your finishers like Salt the Wound, Tenacity, and Lava Burst, where you just get the +1 value. And then it makes your less than 2 power cards better or even on rate. Also, the Unpreventable is nice into certain illusionists. It's great into recently Allied Enigma, and when they introduce maybe a new illusionist that's not really based on allies too much, you can get a lot more value off of this. Plus it blocks too, and so it's like a block 2, but it doesn't ruin your deck for committing this equipment. Like, your deck is based around your equipment, but it's like single use stuff and stuff that you can block with and still function, which is always like a really nice thing to have going into a late game. Now, Tunic and Flamescale, there's not really a versus thing. They kind of have their unique strengths and differences. I would say Flamescale is for aggro mirrors and disruptive decks where you can leverage that 2-block temper. Like, for example, Assassin, where someone comes in with Leave No Witnesses and you're blocked with Flamescale. You're like, okay, I get the free 1 value off of Flamescale to allow me to preserve this arsenal. It can come in clutch in those matchups. And then I think Tunic is best for beating those setup decks. The decks that don't really want to attack into you and try to deal damage, they're kind of getting towards a certain end game where they're more favorable. Sometimes this is even good into certain value decks where the extra resource allows you to more oftentimes go for some of your nastier combos. I will link the video in like the top right of the screen. I made an Ignite plus Flight Path combo video, and Tunic is heavily woven into a lot of the combos that you can do, and it just makes it more likely that you're going to be able to do that. I like running both in my deck, but you can build a deck with one in mind, and that's so viable. I think Flamescale is kind of the easiest to build around just because you know you're not getting the one resource, so you can do a very similar build to mine where you have a very conservative cost curve so you don't brick often, and you can just leverage the 3-block temper, which is good in a lot of matchups. But if you run a solo Tunic build, it gives you the unique advantage of being able to run a lot more one cost and increase the overall power level of each card in your deck at the price of not being able to block as easily and also sometimes not having the resource when you need it. Now, Flight Path versus Snapdragon Scalers. This was the debate early on in the Hunted season of which one to run. I think we pretty clearly identified that Dragon Scaler is just better. Snappies are kind of only better than Dragon Scaler at unbricking a no-starter hand. Like, for example, if you have a Love Vein Loyalty, a blue, and a Blaze Headlong, you can play the Blaze Headlong, give it go again, or play the Love Vein Loyalty, give it go again with Snapdragon Scalers to fix a bricky hand, which was really valuable when you didn't have as many Draconic starters, but we have a lot now, around 25 in the deck, in my deck at least, and some people run more, some people run less. Dragon Scalers block for 1. They allow you to give go again to something after a hit, which is very valuable with draw effects. They let you swing Emberblade twice with Ignite or a Tunic counter. Once again, shoutouts to the video that I made about all the fun little combos you can do with these boots. And Snappies is a great budget option, but if you're gonna run Snappies, I would say don't run my list. Go up in one costs, and you won't be really trying to swing Emberblade twice and leverage that kind of value. You can run it in a more, let's say, non-Draconic focused build and leverage its unique strengths there. And after we're done with the equipment, I'm going to talk about the general game plan on what you're supposed to be doing on Fi. I talked a little bit about like kind of what describes him with the face up sort of deal, but this is the actual kind of game plan. And I know I said I wouldn't talk about advanced topics, but it's kind of important to understand this inherently because it influences a lot of our decisions. So the timeline theory was probably, come up with by a lot of players, but the one who I learned it from was my GOAT, Nathan Crawford, in the top right from the Card Guys, showed this little timeline where each deck kind of has a specific range of turns where it wants the game to end, and it is best when the game ends there. So, for example, us, Ninja, we're aggressive. We want the game to end really early because we have a lot of single-use, one-time things, and we don't really like blocking. So we don't really like a back-and-forth sort of game. We want both players to be taking damage because our cards are best on offense. Opportunistic, Runeblade, this is kind of like your Viscerize from previous metas, or something like non-root chance stacking Florian, where your idea is I can outpace a value deck, and I can take advantage of the game going long to like set up a combo or something, but I don't really have like insane value, and I'm not able to push the aggressive build too much unless I have like a flexible build. This is the one that's like the hardest to describe, but it's still very relevant. Value is Warriors. Obviously, stuff like Valiant Dynamo getting one block every single turn is freaking nuts. And your whole entire bit is I'm just trying to not let the game to go fatigue, but the longer the game goes on, the more value I eke out through my value generating cards. And then finally, fatigue, any fucking degen shit like Rune Chain stacking Florian, rest in piss. You will not be missed. And so this timeline theory tells us that we want the game to end in 1 to 4 turns. We do not want it to last long. And so, as you can see from Lynx and Flight Path, these are single-use offensive monster cards. Flight Path you can get around 4-ish value out of from blocking it and then getting an extra Emberblade swing. So that's 3 offensive value. And then Lynx you're usually tutoring for 7. So if you really think about it, on board you have your opponent at 10 less life effectively at the start of the game, which is really fucking good for you. And you want to make sure the game does not go long because your equipment doesn't eke value over the course of the game. You are essentially a 3 to 4 turn clock that your opponent has to find an answer to, and that's kind of the general way you want to be thinking about every game. It's like, I'm the fast deck, except in the aggro mirrors where you're still duking it out. I'm the fast deck. I want to go fast. I want the game to end as soon as possible. What is the best way to do that? And you essentially are a clock, but you get to control the hands on the clock. You can choose whether they go faster or slower. You most of the time want them to go faster, and the best way to do that is with your sequencing. Yay! I love math. Math. We got this dapper young fellow here with some fucking equations. I don't know why there's like an apple in the bottom right. I like a little side note. These images are always so funny to me because they're the most like nonsensical things in the background. Like it's not even like actual math work, but that's besides the point. Sequencing is probably the most important Phi skill. And I'm going to be covering a little bit of advanced stuff in here, not theoretical stuff, but this is going to be the lengthiest section just due to the fact that it's the most important thing on Phi. Getting better numbers equals ending the game faster, which means you have a higher chance of winning. And sequencing is just a really important part of that. So the anatomy of a Phi deck has kind of like 5 specific cards with their roles. If you look at a deck like Acilio, he has a bunch of cards that might do similar things, but they have their different like uses and goals and what they're trying to do. But with Phi, it's like you kind of have like 5 different types of cards, and they all sort of do the same thing with just slightly different effects. You have your starters, your Ronin Renegades, your Rising Resentments, your Brand with Cinder Claws, 0 for 3 head jabs that have unconditional go again that you slam down and allows you to start your turn so you can set up for getting a Phoenix Flame and then using your extenders and finishers. Your extenders are cards with conditional go again. These cards need like a red card being played, or it needs another Draconic Chain Link to get the go again. But usually for the sacrifice they make for making conditional is that they usually get a stat somewhere else. Like Blaze Headlong gets an extra point of power, Lava Vein Loyalty gets an extra point of block. Your finishers are what makes the deck above rate and actually able to kill people fast. These cards do not have go again, but they deal a lot of damage, and you only get like kind of 1 per turn. So Lava Burst, great example. This is a 2-power thing that allows you to bump it up to 5 if you get a Chainlink 4 or higher, which is really easy to do on Phi all the time. You can, with 2 cards, be able to execute a Lava Burst, and it also triggers Shuko. There are other finishers like Salt the Wind Tenacity, talked about earlier. Your power cards, like Spreading Flames and Rake Over the Coals, and previously Artivore, all allow you to capitalize on a lot of chain links. And it's kind of the main reason that you don't go into a value game plan is because these cards are so powerful. Spreading Flames can easily get up to 6 or 7 value, depending on how big your hand is. Rake Over the Coals, very similar kind of idea. But just generally speaking, your power cards are influence your sequencing and how you want to set up. Spreading Flames is kind of the weird wrench that you might have to play around sometimes that affects sequencing but isn't kind of like a core fundamental part of it. And then tech pieces are kind of irrelevant to sequencing. These are like your defense reactions, your poppers for Prism, maybe your CNCs or your Loyalty Beyond the Graves. You don't really care about these for sequencing with certain situations applying. So we're not going to be talking about that in terms of how the makeup generally is. And the reason I talk about this is every single Phi turn kind of follows a general structure with basic sequencing. This is a very simple basic combo with Phi. You go for a 0 for 3 or 0 for 4 starter, you pitch into an Emberblade, and then you have 1 resource floating. You use that 1 resource to activate Phi. You control 2 Draconic Chain Links, so it goes from 3 to 1. Then you get the Phoenix Flame out. It's very simple. 2 card 7, classic 5 sequencing. You have a starter, you have Ember Blade, which is an extender that you can basically transform any blue into an extender with an extra resource, and then Phoenix Flame is also an extender. You don't need to end a turn with a finisher to make it a turn. You can end it with an extender or even a starter. But the extenders and starters kind of have their specific place that you need them at the start. Now, let's add in a finisher. You do the same combo, and now you're able to end with a Lava Burst, and Shuko triggers, and you're able to deal 1 extra damage. So in total, this would be 3 plus 3 plus 1, 7, plus 6, because you're triggering Shuko. So that's a 3 card 13, which that math is good. A little bit above 4 per card. If you can consistently do this on offense, then you're probably winning the game. And that's what makes Fi have his like strength, is the consistent offensive output. So this is kind of a general structure. And then let's say we wanted to add an extender in there. So we can do Ronin Renegade, Ember Blade, Blaze Headlong, into a Phoenix Flame into a finisher. So you have kind of like a snaking chain where you have the head of the snake is the starter and the tail of the snake is the finisher, and there's a bunch of extenders in between. This is kind of usually what it looks like. Remember that starters can act as extenders or finishers. Extenders can act as extenders or finishers. And that's kind of, and finishers can only really act as finishers. As long as you keep this basic structure in mind and you can identify what cards are what, literally like 90% of Fi hands like are solved on board. Like you look at the hand, this is very clearly what it wants. I have a 1 cost, I have a blue, I have an extender. Boom. Play the 1 cost starter, Ember Blade, extender, Phoenix Flame, boom, you're done. Like, as long as you get a couple reps, you'll know exactly what you're doing when it comes to common Fi turns that wrenches aren't thrown into plans. But what if things get freaky? So, like, you can easily sequence through a bunch of different Fi hands. I could give you, on average, like, it's pretty easy to kind of find out what's going on. The problem is that not every hand is that simple. And what I find is the difference between alright Fi players and great Fi players is when they're given a fucked up hand with a puzzle and they still are able to extract the most amount of value. Because sometimes the hands just don't line up, and even if they do, they can sometimes propose interesting questions that you don't necessarily have the answer to immediately. So what I've found with Fi hands that mess up, maybe this applies to more, ninjas or whatever, but I find, at least for Fi, is that it gets tough when you either have too much of something or too little of something. Too many resources, too little resources, too many starters, too little starters. That's kind of where you get into these weird spots where you need to fix things. So let's start it off. What if you have too many starters? This is kind of a non-issue, so because they can act as extenders or finishers, like I said before, but too little causes a problem. You can either A, do a trick, which is just any kind of trick that bails you out if you have no starter. Some of the most common ones I end up using is you pitch a blue to grab a Phoenix Flame and activate Fi, paying the 3 cost to play Phoenix Flame for 0. It's not ideal because you're basically giving up a card for no value to allow you to make a turn happen, but it's kind of the most common way to get out of a bricked hand. And usually if you have an all red hand, there's a good chance it's a Phoenix Flame it usually has a starter found within it. Kind of like the hands where you get a lot of blues in it is usually when you start getting a little bricked. And another trick that I find that is really cool is the 2x blue Flight Path emergency starter. You can pitch a blue to play Ember Blade, floating 1 resource, and then you can activate Flight Path to give that Ember Blade go again by pitching another blue, because Flight Path costs 2 because you control 1 Draconic Chain Link, so you pitch the other blue, you have 2 resources floating, and then you can Ember Blade again. So you essentially, by using your Flight Path, exchange 2 blues, you got 3 value out of each of those blues, and now you have 2 Draconic Chain Links that you can use, and if you have an extender, you can just plop that on there and then grab the Phoenix Flame, and that's not even a below rate combo. You have to use, it's unfortunate because you give up Flight Path, which can give you a lot more value than just 3 value per card, but it's a great way to bail you out, and it has bailed me out in more games than you would think. Now, your other option is to block it out. Your non-starter cards usually block well, so it's okay to just kind of dump the hand. Your Lava Vein Loyalties, your Hot on Their Heels, your finishers, they all block for 3. So sometimes you can go a very simple, if they send like, I don't know, an erase face, even though the on hit's not relevant because you're not doing go against stuff. You could like block with 2 cards. You could swing a card for 3 and then arsenal a card. And then you don't put a lot of offensive value, but you're still able to convert your hand into 3 value per card, which is usually the other option you have. Now, finishers, too little is usually an issue with deck building rather than sequencing. If you're not drawing enough finishers, you're usually not really doing crazy above rate stuff. But you do prone to breaking yourself if you draw too many finishers. But generally speaking, too little is not really an issue in game. But if you're noticing you're not drawing enough often, you might want to add like 1 more or maybe 2 more. And too many is a problem I don't see enough people talking about. A lot of people think that you have a lot of answers to it, which you do, but that does not make it any less scary. You can block with 1, which is a great option. You see Salt the Wound and Lava Burst. If I move Lava Burst over, it blocks for 3. You can usually block with 1 and play the other, which is fine as an option. But you kind of want to be leveraging these cards. They're kind of the most valuable cards in your deck. Flight Path is another option. If you have a Draconic card, you can give it go again with Flight Path and do something like Lava Burst, Flight Path, Salt the Wound. It kind of acts as like a Snapdragon Scalers. You can pitch it. You can do this with Salt and Tenacity. Right now, my main finishers are 3 Lava Burst, 2 Salt, 1 Tenacity. So if I draw a Lava Burst and a Tenacity, or I draw a Tenacity and Salt, I usually can just pitch 1 to an Emberblade swing if I don't have, if the blue in my hand is playable. But most of the time, I also do this thing sometimes where if I've already triggered Shuko, and I'm debating whether to use Salt, I hold on to it, and if they block out pretty much everything, sometimes I just pitch it to an Emberblade swing at the end of the turn, or I choose to Arsenal it depending on the matchup. Alternatively, you can Arsenal it, which is a little scary because if you Arsenal the second one and you drop your hand and you get another one, you're not clearing yourself of the extra finisher. And in matchups where they can kind of target your arsenal, arsenaling a finisher feels quite bad. But you do have a lot of options. They're just not perfect solutions to get rid of this problem. Blues resources. Having too many blues is a fun problem to have. Usually it's a pitch one, play the other. You have prowess of agility and you don't have a finisher. You can pitch a Cinder Skin and then come in prowess as the last thing of the chain and exchange it for a future card on a future turn if you have that. Usually the decks that you will play, or the ones that you make yourself, will be designed in a way to where every blue has the ability to be somewhat on rate. So if you have to play another blue, you're not really too upset about that. Alternatively, you can block with one and then pitch the other. You can flight path it, which is if you are only getting like 1 value off of the blue anyways, you can pitch it to just get another Emberblade swing into flight path, and then you're able to convert 1 value into 3. This is, I think, only really used if you're sort of later in the game and you haven't really found a way to utilize your flight path effectively to extract extra value. So you can definitely use it in this case. And the last thing you can do is utilize the additional resource to do some cool shit. Oftentimes, an extra resource converts to nothing in most hands, but with a card like Spreading Flames, it can. Where if you grab the Phoenix Flame early, let's say you put out 2 Chain Links, you go Spreading Flames, and then you pitch your Emberblade, you can actually pitch Emberblade, or pitch your second blue, grab the Phoenix Flame on the before the 3rd Chain Link and play it on the 3rd Chain Link, and now you can extract 1 extra value off of the fact that you now can swing Emberblade again and have it come in for 4 value instead of just for 3 value if you swung it twice a little too early. So that's kind of the common situation I find I can make advantage of extra blues, is either kind of flight path it, or if I have Spreading Flames up, I'll do some shit with it. Now, if you have too little blues, I would say you should arsenal the unplayable 1 cost. Oftentimes, too little blues goes hand in hand with too many 1 cost, too little resources. And so if you have a hand that's like 3 0 cost reds and 1 1 cost red, usually you can just arsenal the 1 cost, but that does prone you to drawing another 1 cost on your next turn. And then even if you get the blue there, you can't fully utilize the extra resource. You can't fully utilize the 1 extra resource because you can't like Emberblade with it. Links, you can use a Links to grab an Ignite. So you can Ignite and reduce the cost of the thing that you would have needed a blue for, like a Mounting Anger or Spreading Flames. You can also pitch your least valuable red to play the 1 cost. This is only really recommended in matchups where arsenaling is really bad, and you can't really fully utilize what you want. You could block with it, but oftentimes your 1 costs don't really block too well. And then 1 cost, we talked about them before. Too many 1 costs go really hand in hand with too little blues. Blue with 2 1 cost means you get a Phoenix Flame early. I talked about that a little bit with Spreading Flames and how you can get the Phoenix Flame early with the 2 blues. But you can do a 1 cost, and then double Emberblade swing, or 1 cost, grab the Phoenix Flame, play the Phoenix Flame if you only have 1 blue and 2 1 costs. There's a trick with Flame Call Awakening that I want to mention because Flame Call might be made boarded soon. If you have Spreading Flames or Mounting Anger plus Flame Call, what you can do is you can pitch a blue to Spreading, you can pitch the Flame Call, and then you can play the Phoenix Flame you grab. You can activate Phi, grabbing the Phoenix Flame from your graveyard, and then you can pitch that in addition to the 1 resource you got floating from the blue to get the Emberblade swing in. It's a little sad because you can't play both Phoenix Flames, but it is a way to make up a little bit of the cost of the fact that, oh, I draw 2 1 costs, especially in matchups where getting the second Phoenix Flame out is not really as relevant as you would hope. And then Rising Resentment, finally, can kind of bail you out of certain situations. It's really good. I like Rising Resentment a lot, but you do need to play a starter before you can make its on-hit relevant. And even then, defensive decks will just block that regardless, and offensive decks probably won't. But I don't think you never rely on it to make your turn good. I think you only should rely on it fixing your turn if you're behind in the game and you need a little bit of luck to come back. Now, too little is not really a big issue, but it does mean that you're not fully utilizing the extra resources you have. But the cool part about something like a Flight Path is that it's an outlet for you to use extra resources that you get. So look out for double Emberblade opportunities if you're seeing situations where you're not drawing a lot of 1 costs, where you can maybe utilize an Ignite or utilize a Tunic resource to get 2 Emberblade swings in there because you don't have a 1 cost in hand to really fuck with that kind of angle. And then Oath of Loyalty and non-draconic cards. This is kind of a weird, not specific card archetype, but more so just a common situation that you run into with running Oath of Loyalty. It's a 0-for-4, block 3, go again. That's condition is not too hard to fill, so you want to run 3 copies of it. If you have too little of Oath of Loyalty and non-draconic cards, you are Bing Chilling. You are so fine because that means your hands are not breaking with these 2 cards. But if you have too many, you kind of have a couple options. So if you have 2 Oath of Loyalties, for example, you can maybe Arsenal 1, play 1. If you have Oath of Loyalty plus Fire Tenet, strike first, you can play 1 Arsenal 1. You can block with one of the problematic cards. Remember that Fire Tenet plus a blue or a Lava Vein Loyalty or something is a 2-card 7 because you still get the buff on the Draconic card. You just don't give it go again because it's not inherently Draconic. And make sure to prioritize keeping fealties around for brick hands. The only times I really want to use fealties is for either making a non-draconic finisher draconic so it can get buffed by Spreading Flames or Rake, using it for Dragon Power to act as essentially a blue 6-power 1-cost finisher, or it's to make it so Fire Tenet becomes a draconic starter, or to get around Oath of Loyalty. There are some situations where you know the game might go long and you haven't seen a lot of Fire Tenet and Oath of Loyalty, and you might just want to keep that fealty around and give up maybe like 1 value somewhere just to make sure you don't break, but oftentimes it doesn't really come to that. And now we're going to talk about some general game plans into different archetypes. I'm not going to be talking about specific characters, although I will show characters on screen. But this is just kind of your general strategy into kind of the different styles of deck you might face, Now, there is a wide variety of deck strategies and different ways to play against certain decks, but these are the most common ones you're going to run into. So when you're versing aggro, sequencing is the number one important thing. Against characters like Dash.io and the Phi Mirror, you're not really worried about on hits often. You're not worried about they're coming in for something that's like really scary that I can block, so I might want to commit to. All you can do for yourself is just make sure to get maximum value out of every single card and hope that's enough to win the game, which a lot of the time it is, but sometimes it isn't. You can squeeze extra value out of links with Salt the Wound. A lot of aggro players have this bad habit against links where they will just take every single hit until they see an on hit, and you can sometimes get really greedy and wait later in the chain link to pop Salt the Wound so they don't realize they needed the block earlier, so you can get like 8 to even 9 value on some turns. I think you should only block when it's really necessary, and you need a really good reason to block. Zaylia is a great example where, despite it being an aggro mirror, you want to play your defense reactions, or at least your sync belows in this matchup, because some of the on hits are just too devastating for you to really deal with. And certain cards, decks like Syndra, sometimes present you with opportunities where you can exchange one card to deny like a Mask of Momentum trigger. So your number one goal is never block unless there is a really, really, really good reason to in these matchups. Now, if you're versing a Guardian, or kind of a end games, not an end game sort of deck, but kind of a deck that wants to stifle your offensive pressure through their equipment and some disruptive on hits, offensive overlap is the name of the game. Now, what do I mean by offensive overlap? Offensive overlap essentially is, like the simplest way I can put it, if you tuck a card in Arsenal, that is offensive overlap. You are sacrificing some sort of, not always sacrificing, but you are giving up certain value on one turn to make it so you have more cards for another turn. A great example of this is, or like an offensive overlap payoff, is Rake Over the Coals. The more Draconic cards you play, the more damage it does. So naturally, you're prone to saying, okay, I want to set up a big hand with a lot of cards because I want to be able to produce more chain links because I get more value for having kind of like an offensive overlap. That's the best way I can kind of describe it. Be willing to full block for a setup turn against these decks. Oftentimes, Guardians aren't guaranteed to be able to convert their, like if you give them a full grip with an Arsenal, they will oftentimes not be able to convert it. There are some exceptions where Victor can get like a Golden Sun or something that costs a lot. But most of the time, if you give them like a 5-card hand, they are really prone to bricking, and you can gain a lot of value off the fact that you just didn't swing and let them filter their hand. And setting up is really important. Unless you're worried about getting your arsenal targeted by certain decks and you're worried about on hits too much, you want to set up and you want to make one big chain link. So even if they block it, you're still leaking damage, because leaking damage is really important in these decks because they never really want to be taking it. This is usually a hard one for you, but if you play really well and you think thoroughly through what your blocks, what you're playing, and also try to leverage a little bit of luck, it's definitely a playable matchup, and you can definitely win. Into a traditional style warrior. This is your value-oriented deck. Not always a warrior, just a value numbers-based deck. They are very similar to us in terms they are numbers. They're pure numbers. They don't really present too many on-hits that you have to necessarily worry about. Think of like Kasai, think of Fang. But instead of single-use numbers equipment, they get a continuous stream of good numbers throughout the game. Good example of this is Valiant Dynamo. They can get the one block every single turn continuously off that. And so they want the game to go long because eventually you're going to run out of cards that are single use, and the value you got for the early game gets diminished the more and more value they get towards the late game. So usually there's no reason to block because they aren't presenting on hits. So try to focus on not blocking to not extend the game, and then also focus and say, maybe if you have like a card in hand that you could play for 3 value on one turn, maybe just arsenal it, because there might be a chance you draw a Rake or a Spreading Flames, or you don't draw a Draconic starter and you need a Draconic starter. Understand that because there's not really on hits a lot in these matchups, that you can most of the time get away with arsenaling and being a little bit greedy. And now for Assassins. They possess multiple forms of disruption. Prepare for every possibility if they get to choose what comes out of your hand. Great example of this is Bonds of Agony. If I drop my hand and I see 2 Draconic starters, I see a blue, and I see a 0 cost extender. If the new opponent hits me with a card that lets them look at my hand and choose a card, no matter what card they choose, I'm still getting my Phoenix Flame, I'm still getting 3 Draconic Chain Links, I'm still putting offensive pressure, which most of the time you deal more damage to them on average. They can do some really freaky stuff. Arachne Marionette with, some Arachne Tarantula with Kiss of Death, New with Bonds of Agony plus double Justinic. They can do nut stuff in certain situations, but on average, you're usually dealing more damage than them. And so as long as you account for every possibility, whether you're going to get hit, not hit, or anything, you should be fine and able to outvalue them. In certain cases, even when they come with a disruptive on-hit, if they keep enough cards, you usually aren't able to prevent that unless you read them perfectly. So any blocks you commit feels like a wasted endeavor. So make sure you only block when you know you can actually prevent something and when you want to actually prevent you from getting disrupted. I would not advise it for setting up unless you need to gamble to get back in the game, because they just have so many different ways to target your hand and arsenal, and even if they don't draw CNC when you arsenal a power card, they can draw another card that strips a card from your hand so that you can't make total use of what you just put in your arsenal, and then you might want to keep it, and then they finally draw the CNC, and then that's when it kind of spirals out of control. You don't need to take risks versus assassins. Play it safe, take the guarantees, and usually that should be good enough to beat them, at least from my experience. And endgame decks are kind of the final deck I want to talk about. They kind of want to set up this sort of either combo, or in Kano's case, you want to set up this intercontinental ballistic missile and blow you up. They want to get to a certain point in the game where they either have this combo or they just have an endgame that you can't beat. The best advice I can give, and this is where most players get tripped up, you do not bring answers into their Exodia situation most of the time. Unless it's in Kano, certain situations where it's you buy theoretically more time by having Spell Void, but you don't really want to bring answers into Exodia. You want to not let them assemble it. So try to bring cards that decrease the amount of time they have to play the game, rather than take cards that make that end game a little easier, because usually you still lose if they get into the end game, regardless if you have the power. The great example of this is into Florian. Running Tide Flippers is really bad, because once you get to the scenario where they do pitch a blue into 2 Rune Chants from Grasp into Reaping Blade, that is 1 card 5 split damage. And by the time they get to that point, if you're already low and forced to AP, you're probably not winning that game anyways, except for very specific scenarios, in which case you probably wanted the game to end faster by running Flight Path to get you some extra value. Sometimes giving them 1 more turn than they otherwise would have is enough to lose. So every single turn you have to maximize your value and make sure none of that shit happens. These decks sometimes run disruptive effects like Verdance. Keep in mind that if the deck you're playing against doesn't block well and wants to set up to an endgame and also has kind of disruptive effects, you don't really have to set up as much as you do for another kind of deck like a Guardian. So you can be very comfortable dumping your hand and avoiding the arsenal disruption through just pressuring every single turn. Now, here's some other resources that you can use to get better at Fab and Fi more in general. Flesh and Blood has made some great videos on what to do to how to improve. One of my favorites is why you're maybe not improving in Flesh and Blood for realsies. They also have a series there where she goes over micro optimizations. These are actually really helpful because some of the really small optimizations can lead to victories, especially when you start getting better and better at the game. Another one is Nathan Crawford. This is my GOAT. I love Nathan. He's made me so much better at the game. I've learned a lot from him from watching his streams and watching his videos. Make sure to check out his streams. I think they start Wednesdays sometime later in the night. I usually only get to catch the tail end of them and then watch the VOD later because I have armories that night. And then also the Learning Curve series. He goes over some great stuff. He goes over the timeline more in depth that I talked about earlier. And it's just a great resource for learning the fundamentals of the game. And Fi is a deck that really tests your fundamentals. So really, and I mean really, watch these videos. They're great resources if you haven't already watched them. If you want some more Fi specific content, I think Lupine Fiasco has a huge library of Fi videos that he had pre-Art of War, and then he has some ones from the Hunted. He kind of plays a different playstyle than the average Fi build nowadays, but he still is great at providing good insight into what he's doing, and if you want a more in-depth look at Fi from a game-to-game perspective, I think his videos are great for that. My videos, I don't have many up right now, but I have a couple gameplay videos playing against common decks that you might play against. And I'm trying to upload more in the future, but I hope my videos are a good resource because I'm going to try to put out more of them in the future. And cool thing that I want to do, and I talked about it earlier, is maybe a Fi 102, either in the format of a stream, maybe an article, maybe a presentation like this. It's really up to what the people want. To go in depth, not necessarily in terms of more sort of facts and hard rules about how you should play Fi, but rather the advanced theoretical stuff that helps you win games against really good players. There's actually, like, to give you a little tease, is I actually think bluffing is really important on Fi. It's a skill that you can use in any hero, but because you're a very face-up hero, very linear, and your opponent can kind of predict what you're doing, any micro optimization to make it so you are waiting for the last possible minute to give your opponent information and or giving them incorrect information and use their experience against them is really valuable. Good example, I played against someone in the ProQuest who's playing Fang, and they had the Kabuto, which they know is proper into Fi, because if you can read the Ember Blade and see the pitch of the blue, you can get a lot of value. I intentionally blocked with Flight Path the turn when I was about to play an Ignite, and I know that Ignite plus Boots equals double Emberblade Swing, and he knows that too, and I did that, and instead of double Emberblade Swing, I didn't actually have a blue in hand, I ignited into a Mounting Anger and did a pitchless turn. And so through that, I extracted 3 value, which that 3 value allowed me to win the game when I was on 1 HP. So bluffing in Fi, I find, is a very important skill, but it's not something you need to start playing the hero. And I want to talk about this and a lot more things in maybe like a future video. So if that's the kind of content you want to watch, please let me know. Tell me what format you want to see it in, and I will make sure to do it. And thank you so much for watching. This has been a very fun project to work on, and I hope you learned a lot about Fi. As always, if you have any questions, please, please, please put them in the comments for me to see. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm not going to keep you for too long. And have fun playing Fi. Hit me up on Discord anytime if you have further questions. And also make sure to go to the Fab Purple Discord in the Fi channel. A lot of good players there that can answer your questions if I'm not available, or if I have a wrong opinion. Probably will happen in terms of talking about Prism, because I'm really bad at that matchup. But that's besides the point. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Love you. Bye.